Good afternoon, State Senator Bruce Tarr. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Heather. I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. What do we have to talk about today?
Well, there's a lot happening on Beacon Hill, and one thing I would remind folks is that formal sessions of the legislature for this year are going to conclude on November 17th. Now, that doesn't mean we can't take up items after that because we still are required to meet every 72 hours. But in informal sessions, any member can stop the legislative session, and we reserve those times for routine matters, not matters where there would be debate or there would be recorded roll call votes. So we are now in a sprint toward the end of formal sessions for this calendar year, and there are a lot of things happening. One of the most important and one of the most significant that will have lasting results over the next decade is redistricting. We are required to create new legislative districts, both for the state legislature and for the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as our governor's council. And largely that process is driven by the time frame for the House of Representatives, because in Massachusetts, you have to live in a House district 1 year before the election. And that means that we have to get those maps done a year before the election. So basically the first week in November. And of course, while we're doing that, we try to do the rest of them roughly at the same time. So today, as we speak, this is Tuesday, the Joint Committee on Redistricting is releasing and going to vote on its proposal for proposed maps for House and Senate legislative districts. That is not the end of the process. That would just move those proposals from the committee out to the House and to the Senate for more process and more consideration. But it is significant. And again, we are here in mid-October, and this process needs to be done, at least for House legislative districts, needs to be done by the first week in November. So it's moving, and there is a very distinct time frame for us to be able to complete that process. And I would point out, Heather, that these maps contain a lot of change for both House legislative districts and Senate legislative districts at the state level. And that's because we have seen significant population changes in Massachusetts. And where we have seen population growth is also significant. So we still have relatively low growth in the western part of the state, higher growth in the eastern part of the state. And in some of those areas in the eastern part of the state, we have more growth in minority populations, which need to be accommodated in terms of the Voting Rights Act and other both statutory and case law requirements. So there's a lot happening with this, and it's very important for people to know about it and to weigh in about it.
Well, I have two questions. Do both branches assess both maps? Does the House, okay, so they work on all of them.
So these are essentially bills. They're bills that contain maps, but they also contain verbal descriptions of each district. And they have to be approved by the House and the Senate, and then they go to the governor like other bills would. So there's a lot of legislative process yet to go here. We are really about midway through. The committee has held its public hearings, has taken testimony, has drawn the proposed maps, but they next will go most likely to the floor of the House for debate and potential amendment. Then they come to the Senate. Now, historically, the Senate has given deference to the House's proposal for House legislative districts, and the same is true for the House with regard to Senate legislative districts. But it is still a situation where these are bills. They need to travel the full legislative process.
And I understand that the public commentary ended yesterday, Monday?
It did. It did.
Do you have a sense of what what comments are coming in, what people are weighing in and saying? Do you have any idea?
Well, it's hard to categorize them. There's comments largely that are based on what part of the state you're in. So a lot of communities, for instance, are concerned about having their community split between two legislative districts. Other communities are raising issues of trying to keep communities of interest together. So, for instance, we've heard from school districts that would like to be in the same legislative district. So the concerns are all over the board. And even though official testimony has ended on the part of the committee, as I mentioned, there's still a lot of process left to go here. And part of the legislative process is for people to be able to talk to their legislators about bills that are coming onto the floor of the respective chambers. So there's still an opportunity to provide input, and I'm certain that that's going to happen as we continue to move these bills along.
And your district, the first Essex and Middlesex district, may see some changes also, right?
Not as much change as many other districts, but still significant changes nonetheless. So the committee has proposed that our district would no longer have Wilmington, but would add the towns of Topsfield and Salisbury and the city of Newburyport. That's not insignificant. And so that's something that we're thinking long and hard about. And many of those changes are necessitated by the need to create a new minority majority district centered around Lawrence because of Latino voters in that area. So there's a lot of ripple effect, and that's what's causing a significant amount of change in our Senate district.
Well, and tell us what the governor's been up to.
Among other things, the governor put an innovative proposal on the table, and it's something that I don't think has gotten enough attention. But you know, there's a continuing discussion about what we do with ARPA funding from the federal government. The governor has filed a bill to create a $750 million clean energy investment fund. And that would be targeted toward things that reduce carbon emissions, things like wind and solar energy. And it would provide a whole host of different types of grant opportunities to be able to invest in those projects, in planning for them, in a whole wide range of things. And at the same time, the bill also changes some of the rules around offshore energy procurement. So one of the major elements of Massachusetts' strategy to have zero carbon emissions by 2050 is to have a lot more offshore wind production. And there are a whole series of issues associated with that, which I won't get into right now, except to say we have to make sure we strike a balance between energy production and supporting the commercial fishing industry. And on Cape Ann, we're keenly aware of that. But with regard to offshore wind, one of the things the governor is proposing is changing who decides on the contract awards. So right now it's done by the energy companies themselves. The governor thinks in the future that may create a situation that has too much self-interest for those companies. And so he wants to shift to a model where the Division of Energy Resources makes the decision in consultation with the energy companies. So this is a pretty significant bill, and I think we'll be hearing more about it as time goes by. But I think the point is that on Beacon Hill, we are continuously focused on those looming deadlines that we have to meet in terms of carbon reduction and how we might need to get there. And the governor's put a really bold proposal on the table.
Now, you opened this conversation talking about ARPA funds. Is this $750 million this bill coming out of the ARPA funds?
That's what the governor has proposed, yes.
4 something billion at this point, is that right?
About 4.8 billion, yes.
Right. So, and what do you think? It sounds promising to me. What do you think the success of this bill will be?
I think it's going to meet with a very receptive audience in terms of the legislature that has also prioritized clean energy. I think the devil will be in the details. It will be about how this money gets spent and who gets to spend it. And we've got a long way to go in that discussion.
And I had read this week about Salem becoming a sort of a building center for some of these turbines. Any news on that?
So Salem has demonstrated significant leadership in terms of being a port and a staging area for the offshore wind industry. And that was the announcement that was made. They're essentially taking most, if not all, of the land that was the former Salem power plant, which was decommissioned because of its own emission issues. And now, in a very positive turn of events, something that was contributing pollution is now going to be contributing to the development of a new industry in terms of offshore wind. And one of the things that's happening on the East Coast is sort of a battle to see which states and which ports can gain a major market share in the development of this new industry. And we're obviously concerned with our competitors up and down the East Coast because the federal government is looking to develop more offshore wind sites, some of them fixed sites, some of them floating sites. But the point is, Massachusetts is working to be out front in terms of creating that opportunity to anchor some of that business here. And Salem took a major step toward doing that with their announcement and with the actual project.
It's really kind of exciting, isn't it, to see just the beginning of this movement towards wind become an actual economy that affects local people. right?
There's no question about it. Massachusetts does have a significant green economy, and over the years has grown thousands of jobs in that sector. But this is an entirely new frontier, and it's new for the United States. It's not necessarily new in other parts of the world, particularly in Scandinavia. But as we think about how we move forward, again, I always have to offer the caveat that we do have a traditional industry that plies these waters, and that's the commercial fishing industry. And so we have to make sure that we strike a balance, because food is important and energy is important, and we can't afford to displace one in order to achieve more of the other.
Well said. Well, thank you very much. I know you have to get on with your busy week. Appreciate the conversation.
Well, thanks, me too, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Okay, take care.
You too.